Hello everybody, it is, pardon me while I put my glove back on. It is Monday the 13th of November. I'm afraid I had a bit of a problem with my podcast on Saturday, and I spent most of Saturday and much of Sunday trying to get it to work, but unfortunately I don't think I'd connected the microphone properly because the sound kept dropping in and out and it just became unusable. Lots of phrases were missing. I'd get halfway through a thought and the sound would disappear, and then it would suddenly reappear and then disappear again. So in the end I had to abandon it. So I thought today I would come outside and give you a bonus episode. So that's the first bit of housekeeping. The second bit of housekeeping, I'm sure you've noticed, is my rather splendid first week of November. Well, almost 2 weeks now of November. I decided this year that I would go for a mutton chops approach. My reason for that is I think it's important as part of the Movember process. Part of what we're trying to do is raise awareness of men's health issues, and so by being so blatant, I'm not sure what the word is. It's not blatant. It's exaggerated, I guess, about the appearance. It forces people's attention onto the issues as to why I'm growing it. So this year I've gone for the 19th century mutton chops. So it'll be full beard down and then just around the top and back up again. So you catch me also wearing my winter coat for the first time this year. It's rather parky today, shall we say. It's a bit chilly. Although it's warmer now, it was very cold this morning. And you'll also notice my rather splendid red fedora. I say fedora because anyway, it amuses me. So I've come down to Albert Park, which is a municipal park on the north side of Ox Street. So where I walked along the river as part of my Vlogtober, the River Ock Valley Walk, today I'm on the other side of Ox Street, and I'm between the town centre, which is away on my right hand side, or your left, so in that direction, and because I'm never quite sure if the camera is reversed. I think it is, so it's in that direction anyway, and Marcham and the edge of Abingdon to the west is out that direction. There's a school, well, there are several schools in this area. There's Abingdon Boys School, which is an independent day and boarding school, and then across the main road there is St Helens and St Catherine's, Hellcats as it's known, which is an independent day and boarding school for girls. And then just slightly further along is the State Comprehensive School, Larkmead, which is part of the Vale Academy Trust, and the other secondary school in that trust is King Alfred's out in Wantage. And I've mentioned King Alfred because I wanted to mention the high schools, the state high schools in Abingdon. We have Larkmead, which is part of the King Alfred School network. We have Fitzharris School, which, as I've mentioned before, is the name of the family that built the Motte and Bailey Castle that is in the centre of the town that I've taken you to. And the third high school is named after John Mason. It is called John Mason High School. And John Mason has a significant role to play in this park, in a sense. So let's take history back. We're going to go back to the dissolution of the monasteries in 1538. And at the same time that Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries, he also closed down all of the religious-based guilds. And in Abingdon, you may remember, at St Helen's Church, on the porch, there was a meeting room above the side porch with a small room for a priest to live in that was the meeting room of the Holy Cross Guild. And that was suppressed at the same time as the Abbey, even though it wasn't part of the Abbey. And in 1553, just before he died, Edward VI gave a charter to Christ's Hospital, Abingdon, to take over the works of the guild and the works of the abbey in providing the alms for the poor and succour for the elderly and of the parish and so on. And you recall from St Helen's Church we had the Long Alley almshouse, was the rebuilt original almshouse in Abingdon. And gradually the extra almshouses, Brick Alley and Twitty's and the various others that I've shown you around the town were added to the portfolio. And the charter was strengthened by Queen Mary when she became queen in 1553 after the death of Edward VI. And she appointed a local Abingdon man who was a courtier and had been a favourite of Thomas More when he was Chancellor of England, named John Mason. And he is the John Mason after whom John Mason School is named. So he established Christ's Hospital in Abingdon and established its charter. And it's one of the oldest charities in the country. It still functions today in the same way. But a lot of the lands that had belonged to the abbey were given to the charity as part of its foundation so that they could earn rents from the farmers, including a place called Conduit Field. And this park that you see behind me, this wonderful park, was Conduit Field. And in the 1850s, Parliament decided that Christ's needed to divest itself of part of its portfolio, perhaps is a polite way of saying it, and to provide more facilities for the people of Abingdon. And so Albert Park was established. And Albert Park is named after Prince Albert, who it was the Prince Consort of Queen Victoria. Prince Albert wasn't the first Prince Consort in England. Queen Mary herself was married to King Philip II of Spain, but he was never King of England. And just as Mary was never herself Queen of Spain, so they were both monarchs in their own right, but they didn't have any authority ruling in the other person's country. Following Queen Mary was Queen Elizabeth, whom King Philip II of Spain tried to marry as well, but her courtiers persuaded her against it. And so she famously remained the Virgin Queen, so she didn't have a consort. Queen Mary II, King James II's daughter, replaced him on the throne in 1688, along with her husband William of Orange, who became William III of England. And then Queen Anne and her husband, just to stick with that, Queen Mary and King William were joint monarchs, so they were both monarchs of England in their own right and jointly together. And they were the only monarchs of England to jointly rule in that way. And then finally, Queen Anne, her husband, Prince George of Denmark and Norway, became Duke of Cumberland when she acceded to the throne, and she tried to have him made king consort, but the Duke of Marlborough persuaded her against pressing the case, and so he remained Prince Consort and was the first Prince Consort of England, Albert being the second Prince Consort of Great Britain now, and then obviously Prince Philip being the third Prince Consort. So that was but I mentioned that Queen Victoria has a statue erected to her memory in the Market Square, now in the Abbey Gardens. Well, Albert Park being named in memory of Prince Albert, there was also a memorial raised to him here. So I'll just turn the camera around so that you can see the other side. So as you can see, this is a memorial to Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, who was the Prince Consort of Queen Victoria. And her portrait in a cameo style is set into the base of the memorial, and at the very bottom is just inscribed the single word Albert. And around the side you will see, if I go a little closer, you'll be able to see the monogram VR, which is Victoria Regina. It's a little bit worn, but I think you can still see the lettering there. And the cameo of the Queen is set on all four sides, and there are thistles up this side along with the Abingdon town emblem, and in fact there's thistles and roses and it looks like daffodils. So they're obviously England, Wales and Scotland, with the arms of Abingdon town set at the top, the bottom and the middle. So it's rather a fanciful statue. And right at the very top, the lions, which I think you can just see, are bearing the arms of England, or Great Britain in fact. So in the top left, as you look at it, you have the three lions, which are actually leopards of England, and in the bottom right, and in the top right you have the single lion of Scotland, and bottom left you have the harp of the Kingdom of Ireland as it then was. I'll just turn the camera back. So Albert Park is a very beautiful location, obviously very noisy when the schools are letting out, but it very quickly quietens down. It's far enough away from the main roads that although you get the background in the distance of cars, it's not particularly noticeable. It's a beautiful park in many respects because there are in fact around 500 to 550 trees in this park, and they were last catalogued in 2014 as part of the park restoration. And indeed, when they were planted, some of the trees in this park were amongst the first of their type in Britain. So we have monkey puzzle trees and sequoias, coastal redwoods rather than the giant redwoods. And there are cypresses and cedars and Judas tree. The Judas tree is named because it is reputed to be the tree from which Judas hanged himself after betraying Jesus to Pilate, or to the Jewish high priest rather. And there are two thoughts about why it's called the Judas tree. One is that when the fruit first develop, they hang from the branches, and it's thought to be reminiscent of a hanging man, which I don't buy myself. I think that's a lot of stuff and nonsense. The more probable derivation is that it's known in French as the tree Arbre de Judée, the tree of Judea. And it's very common for words from another language when moved into English for people to simply alight upon the closest sounding word, whether it's accurate or not. And so I rather suspect it's called the tree of Judas, when in fact it should be the tree of Judea. Just away on my left hand side is a bowling green, and this is where the Abingdon Town Bowls Club plays, and it's closed when matches are not being played. And as part of the restoration, I think you can see behind me, there are new trees being planted in order to maintain the diversity within the park. I'm just looking for a monkey puzzle tree. I've seen one and I can't remember where I saw it now. But as I walk around, if I see it, I will point it out. The monkey puzzle tree is a cypress tree from Chile. And its name in English derives from the fact that when it was first planted in England in the 18th century, it was quite a spectacle. This very tall, thick bark, and then the dome of the tree being very high up. And it was said to be a puzzle to climb that even a monkey would struggle with. And so it became the monkey puzzler, and then the monkey puzzle. So most of the trees in this area are deciduous, but there are quite a few conifers as well. So there's a good mix of copper birch and beech trees and alders and limes and yews. The yew tree is a tree with particular history in England. It is the favoured tree from which branches were cut to create longbows because it is very springy. And famously, yew trees are only ever planted in graveyards. And this isn't an association with the dead so much as yew trees are actually toxic to cattle and sheep. So the only place they could be planted was a place where they wouldn't be at risk of being eaten by animals. We're just going under the canopy now, and I've got a beautiful holly tree just on my right, and it should soon be time for the berries to start appearing. It's certainly getting cold enough now that we should start seeing them, and there are some beautiful pine trees, and we have, as I say, limes and oaks and cedars and willows and all kinds of different species dotted here and thereabouts. I do have in fact, this holly tree is absolutely resplendent with its berries, so Christmas must definitely be on its way. And just behind me is a small building called Conduit House. Now, as I say, this was Conduit Field. This is Conduit House. I have looked around online for why it might be called Conduit Field and Conduit House, and I can't find any strong reference to its name. However, in the direction in which I'm looking, more or less, going past the Conduit House, and its straight edge, as it were, so it's a hexagonal building, so looking straight at it, directly in that line is Sturt Street. So my belief is that the River Sturt, such as it is, runs under this park, and Conduit House was obviously part of a pumping station or an access point to get at the underground culverts. Whatever the case, that's my fanciful idea. I think there's a degree of truth in it, and I'm going to stick with it for the time being unless I'm proven wrong. So I'll just walk up around Conduit House and you'll be able to see it's got I honestly don't know its purpose. There's nothing at all on it. It's a very nicely built, stone-faced little building. It could be, if this were a medieval parkland, then I would say that was a lodge gate, potentially. But this is a 19th century parkland, and that isn't a 19th century building, so I can only think that it has some relationship to the River Sturt, which runs around here. And the area to the north and the west of the park is very attractive Victorian villas, built again around the time of the park as part of the divestment of the portfolio, and raised a huge amount of income, of course, for the charity when the buildings were sold. It's considered to be a Victorian suburb on a par with that of Summertown in North Oxford, Parktown rather, in North Oxford, which is the most expensive part of Oxford. The houses there are detached houses, Victorian, most of them, living in a very secluded part, right up just in the centre of the town, on the northern edge of the centre of the town, and valued in the millions. And I suspect these houses are probably not that far removed from that kind of figure. I'm just going to stop now and walk down to the other end of Park Road, and I'll rejoin you shortly. So I've made my way down now to the little farming hamlet of Shippen, just to the northwest of Abingdon, I guess, well, west of Abingdon. And I've come down a road. The first road as you come over the A34 out of Abingdon is on the left. The first road, is named Barrow Road. Now there is a supposition that names of places that have been around really since the medieval period probably point to a much more ancient history. And we know that in north-east Abingdon, if you go on the Radley Road, which is the road at the end of the street where I live, and you go out north-east towards Radley, you reach the outskirts of Abingdon at 12 Acre Drive. And when that was being built, and the housing estate on this side, on the Abingdon side of the road, was being built, one of the fields that was being built on was named Barrow Hills. And it had been named Barrow Hills since at least the 16th century, and probably earlier, but nothing written down. And an excavation was done just to investigate whether or not there were any barrows there, whether they had been completely ploughed away by the medieval and early modern farming that had taken place there. And it was discovered that there were 32 barrows in Barrow Hills field, and within those barrows had been placed Anglo-Saxon grave cuts as well, because once a place, as I mentioned when I was up at the various hill forts and Wayland Smithy, once a place is known to be sacred to the memory of the ancestors, it tends to be that future generations respect the ancestry of the place, and you often find that where there were Roman or pagan temples, there are churches built in the medieval period. And this church here, which is the Church of St Mary Magdalene, is actually a 19th century building. It was designed by Sir George Gilbert Scott, who also designed St Pancras Station, and whose son Sir Giles Gilbert Scott designed Battersea Power Station, which is now the Tate Modern Gallery. No, sorry, not Bankside, isn't it? Power Station and Battersea Power Station, but Bankside is now the Tate Modern. And he also designed Liverpool Cathedral, Oban Cathedral on the west coast of Scotland, and Ampleforth Abbey Church, amongst other things, and is responsible for that great icon of British design, the red telephone box. But this is his father, and he was very much a proponent of revived Gothic decorated style, and so you'll see that there are capitals, not quite capitals because at the base of the window arch, but they would be in the place of capitals if there had been an arch going up the side of various figures. And the pinnacle, the spire, is on at that end is very much decorated in the decorated style. And the belief is, I should mention that this, as I said, this road is called Barrow Road, and the belief is that this church is probably on the site of ancient barrows on this side of Abingdon. There has been a chapel on this site since probably the early 1200s, so the early 13th century. And the chapels were under the control of the vicars of Abingdon, based at St Helen's Church. And it might seem this is a long way from St Helen's, but all of the land where Conduit Field, where Albert Park is now, all the land on that northeastern side of Abingdon was part of the patronage of St Helen's in the medieval period, and that's because all of the rest of the lands were under the patronage of the Abbey of Abingdon. And the main roads were probably built by the monks in order to get the produce from their tenant farmers to the docks to send downstream to the markets at Dorchester, Burford and Reading, and eventually London. After the dissolution of the monasteries, a lot of the land was redistributed, but Shippen and Dry Sandford and a couple of other chapels of ease of Abingdon were maintained, but just basically as a chapel. And it was only in the 19th century that all of these places gained their own parish churches as the populations began to increase. Shippen, back in the medieval period, probably was a hamlet of no more than 3 or 4 houses, maybe a couple of farms. Now it's a small village that serviced the Army RAF base that was just around the corner, and the church itself is endowed with significant gifts from the RAF over the last 100 years. So I think I'm going to call it a day now. So I hope that this little ramble across northeast Abingdon has made up somewhat for the failure to record a podcast this week. It does mean also that you can look forward to a bumper 2-week podcast next Saturday. And so for now, I will say goodbye, and I will speak to you all again soon. So goodbye.